The year is sometime in the 12th century, during the chaotic reign of King Stephen. Imagine the Suffolk countryside. It is a world painted in earthy tones of brown and green. The fields around the village of Woolpit are ripe for harvest. Sunlight, thick and golden, filters through the late summer haze. Villagers are hard at work, their days dictated by the sun and the seasons. They are reaping the rewards of their labor, cutting down sheaves of wheat. Life is hard, but predictable. Then something happens that shatters this predictability. A sound, faint at first, drifts from the ancient wolf pits that give the village its name. It is a sound no one can place. It was not the howl of a wolf, for the last of those had been hunted from these woods long ago. It was not the cry of a lost lamb, it was something else. Something human, yet utterly alien. The reapers paused, their scythes resting in their hands. They exchanged nervous glances. Curiosity, mixed with a healthy dose of medieval fear, propelled them towards the pits. These were deep trenches, dug centuries before to trap wolves. Now they were overgrown with weeds and shadows. As the villagers drew closer, the strange whimpering grew louder. Peering over the edge, they saw a sight that would be talked about for centuries to come. A sight so bizarre it would be written down by learned monks and passed into legend. Huddled at the bottom of the pit were two children, a boy and a girl. They were dressed in peculiar clothes made from a material no one recognized. But it was not their strange attire that made the villagers gasp and cross themselves. It was their skin. Their skin was the color of fresh spring leaves, a vibrant and unnatural green. They looked lost and terrified, their large eyes wide with fear. They chattered to each other in a frantic melodic language that sounded like no tongue spoken in England or indeed anywhere in the known world. The harvest was forgotten. The villagers stood frozen, staring at the impossible figures who had seemingly emerged from the very earth itself. Who were they? Where had they come from? Were they demons sent to test the faithful, or were they something else entirely? Something not of this world. These questions raced through the minds of the simple, God-fearing folk of Woolpit. The children's fear was palpable, a tangible thing that hung in the air alongside the scent of cut wheat and damp earth. They clung to each other, their green faces streaked with tears. The villagers, after their initial shock, were moved by a mixture of pity and profound suspicion. A decision had to be made. They could not leave them there. With great caution, they helped the children from the pit and led them towards the village and into history. Life in 12th century Woolpit was a cycle of toil and prayer. The day began at dawn with the crowing of the rooster and the chiming of the church bell. Men would trudge out to the fields to plough, sow, or reap, depending on the season. Women managed the household, a domain of constant work. They baked bread in clay ovens, churned butter, spun wool, and tended to the kitchen garden and the livestock. Children learned their future roles from a young age. The boys helping in the fields, the girls learning domestic skills. Their world was small and intimate. It was bounded by the church at its center and the surrounding fields and woods. News traveled slowly, carried by the occasional merchant or pilgrim. Strangers were a rarity and were often viewed with suspicion. The arrival of the green children was therefore more than just a curiosity. It was a seismic event. It was as if a story from a fantastical romance had sprung to life in their very own village. The children were brought to the home of a local landowner, a man named Sir Richard de Calne. The entire village seemed to descend upon his hall, desperate to catch a glimpse of the green-skinned arrivals. They pressed against the windows and crowded the doorway, whispering in hushed, anxious tones. Inside, the children huddled by the fire, their strange coloring even more vivid in the flickering firelight. The daily routines of Woolpit were completely derailed. Instead of gossiping about the price of wool or the success of the harvest, the villagers could speak of nothing else. Was it an omen? A miracle? A curse? The parish priest was consulted, but even he was at a loss. He thumbed through his heavy, leather-bound Bible, searching for answers, but found no mention of people with green skin. The event challenged their understanding of God's creation. They believed the world was a settled and known place, mapped out by divine will. These children, with their otherworldly appearance and unknown language, suggested that the world was far stranger and more mysterious than they had ever imagined. Sir Richard de Calne, a man of some standing and education, took a practical approach, though he was as baffled as anyone. He offered the children food, a gesture of hospitality to these bewildering guests. Plates of roasted meat, coarse bread and cheese were laid before them. But the children recoiled from the food, turning their heads away and weeping. For days, they refused to eat anything the villagers offered. Their arrival had not just interrupted the village's routine, it had presented an immediate and perplexing problem. How do you care for someone who seems to reject the very fabric of your world, from your language to your daily bread? And the most striking feature of the children was, of course, their skin. It was not a sickly, jaundiced yellow-green, but a definite, vibrant shade of green. The chroniclers who recorded the story, William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall, were clear on this point. They described it as viridis, the Latin word for green. This single, extraordinary detail set them apart from all known peoples. Added to this was their language. It was a torrent of sounds that no one could decipher. It was not French, nor Latin, nor any of the Celtic tongues from the fringes of the kingdom. It was utterly alien. The children would speak only to each other, their voices rising and falling in a strange musical cadence that only deepened the mystery. Their refusal of food became a critical concern. Sir Richard's household offered them all the staples of a medieval diet. They tried pottage, a thick stew of grains and vegetables. They offered fish from the river and pies filled with game. But the children would only look at the food and weep, their hunger clearly growing, but their refusal absolute. The villagers watched, helpless, as the strange visitors grew weaker. It seemed they might starve to death in a house full of food. Then a breakthrough occurred. Some servants brought in a basket of freshly picked broad beans, the stalks still attached. The children's eyes lit up with recognition. They frantically gestured towards the beans, but instead of opening the pods, they tried to break open the stalks, crying with frustration when they found them empty. A helpful villager showed them how to split the pods to reveal the beans inside. The children fell upon them, devouring them raw with a desperate hunger. For a long time, this was all they would eat, raw beans straight from the pod. This strange dietary preference only added another layer to their enigma. What kind of place did they come from, where the only food was raw beans, and where people did not know to look inside the pod? The detail was so specific, so peculiar, that it lent a strange credibility to an otherwise unbelievable story. The children's behavior was as odd as their appearance. They were sensitive to bright sunlight, often shielding their eyes as if in pain. They seemed more comfortable in the dim, candle-lit interiors of the medieval hall. Their clothes were another puzzle. Described as being made of an unfamiliar fabric and of a strange cut, they added to the sense that the children were from somewhere completely different. Every aspect of their being, their skin, their language, their diet, their clothes, screamed of otherness. They were a living, breathing riddle, dropped into the heart of Suffolk, and the villagers could only stare, wonder, and speculate about the impossible land that had produced them. The two children, though they had arrived together, soon began to follow very different paths. The boy, who was the younger of the two, seemed to struggle from the very beginning. He was more withdrawn, more melancholic. While his sister showed glimmers of curiosity about her new surroundings, he remained lost in a deep and inconsolable sadness. He rarely engaged with the villagers and spent most of his time in a state of lethargy, his green skin appearing to pale and sicken. The diet of raw beans was not enough to sustain him, and although he was eventually coaxed into trying other foods, his health continued to decline. The boy's spirit seemed to be broken. Perhaps it was the shock of their arrival, the loss of his home, or an illness he had brought with him from his strange land. The villagers did what they could, but medieval medicine was limited, and his ailment was beyond their understanding. He faded slowly, like a plant deprived of its native soil and light. Within a few months of their astonishing appearance at the Woolpits, the boy succumbed to his mysterious illness and died. His passing added a tragic note to the mystery. It also left his sister entirely alone, the last speaker of her language, the only keeper of their shared secret. In contrast to her brother, the girl began to adapt. She was given the baptismal name Agnes. She proved to be more resilient and perhaps more pragmatic. After her brother's death, she seemed to understand that her survival depended on fitting in. She slowly began to eat other foods, starting with bread and then moving on to a more conventional diet. As she did, a remarkable transformation took place. The strange green hue of her skin began to fade, gradually being replaced by the normal, healthy complexion of any other young woman in Suffolk. She was learning to live in this new, sunlit world. Agnes also began to learn English. It must have been a slow and difficult process, but over the years she became fluent. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Now that she could communicate, could she finally solve the riddle of her origins? She grew up in Sir Richard de Calne's household, and the chronicles note that she later married a man from King's Lynn, a busy port town some 40 miles away. She was described as being rather loose and wanton in her conduct, a slightly scandalous detail that for me makes her feel more real. But before she fully assimilated, and while the memory of her past was still fresh, she told her story. And it was a story more incredible than anyone could have imagined. Once Agnes had mastered English, she was questioned relentlessly about her past. Where did you come from? Why is your skin green? How did you get here? Her answers, pieced together over time, painted a picture of an otherworldly home. She said she and her brother came from a place called St. Martin's Land. It was a place unlike any on Earth. There was no sun as we know it. Instead, the land was bathed in a perpetual twilight, a soft, dim light like the one just after sunset. Everything existed in this shadowy gloom. All the inhabitants of her land, she claimed, had the same green skin color as she and her brother once had. She described a life lived underground, or at least in a world without a sun. This detail seemed to explain their sensitivity to bright light and perhaps even their green skin, a feature some later theorists would link to a lack of sunlight. Agnes could not explain how this twilight world was illuminated. It simply was. She spoke of her people and their way of life, though the chronicles unfortunately do not record many of these specifics. The most tantalizing part of her story was how she and her brother had arrived in Woolpit. It was, according to her, a complete accident. Agnes recounted a day when they were herding their father's flocks. They followed the animals into a cavern. The sound of bells, loud and beautiful, echoed from deep within the darkness. Drawn by this enchanting sound, they wandered through the winding passages for a very long time, eventually becoming lost. They continued to walk towards the sound of the bells, hoping it would lead them out. Finally, they emerged from the cave mouth, but when they did, they were blinded by the brilliant, painful light of the sun. The world was shockingly bright and loud. They were lying at the bottom of the wolf pit with the sounds of the Woolpit harvest all around them. This was the story she told. A subterranean world of green people living in twilight, a mysterious cave, and a magical sound of bells that led them into our world. To the medieval mind, this was a story that blurred the lines between the natural and the supernatural. St. Martin was a popular saint, and the idea of a magical land named for him was not entirely outside the realm of possibility. Her account did not solve the mystery, it simply replaced one enigma with another, even greater one. Was St. Martin's Land a real, undiscovered place on Earth, or was it something else entirely? When we look at this story through a modern lens, one of the first explanations we might reach for is psychological. Could the story of the green children be a distorted memory, a confabulation created by two traumatized children? Imagine for a moment two young Flemish immigrants. During the 12th century, there was significant persecution of Flemish settlers in England. It's possible the children's parents were killed and they fled into the dense Thetford forest. Lost, starving and terrified, they could have wandered for days before collapsing in the wolf pits near Woolpit. Their strange clothes might have simply been unfamiliar Flemish attire. Their green color could be explained by a condition called chlorosis or green sickness. It is a severe form of iron deficiency anemia that can cause a distinct greenish pallor to the skin. A diet of nothing but beans, which is low in iron, would not have helped. This condition, coupled with malnutrition, could certainly make a child look very strange to villagers who had never seen it before. The boy, being weaker, succumbed to the effects of starvation and illness. The girl, Agnes, survived, and with a proper diet, her anemia corrected itself and her skin returned to a normal color. This seems like a neat and plausible medical explanation for one of the story's most baffling elements. The unknown language could simply have been a Flemish dialect that the isolated Suffolk villagers did not recognize. And the story of St. Martin's Land, this is where child psychology comes in. Having witnessed something terrible and being unable to process the trauma, the children might have invented a fantasy world as a coping mechanism. The Land of Twilight could be a metaphor for their dark and terrifying journey through the forest. The story of emerging from a cave into a bright world is a powerful allegory for their own traumatic arrival in a new, frightening place. It was a story created by a child's mind to make sense of a world that had been turned upside down. This psychological theory is compelling because it grounds the story in real-world possibilities. It doesn't require us to believe in magic or aliens. It asks us to believe in the resilience and creativity of the human mind under extreme stress. Agnes's story of an underground world becomes not a factual report, but a beautiful and tragic piece of psychological self-preservation. It was her way of explaining the inexplicable, of creating a coherent narrative out of chaos and fear. The mystery then becomes not about where the children came from, but about the profound trauma they must have endured. Of course, the people of the 12th century did not have modern psychology or medicine to help them understand. They had something else. A deep-seated and very real belief in another world that existed alongside their own. This was the realm of fairies, or the Fae folk. To them, the story of the green children fit perfectly into the existing framework of folklore. Fairies were believed to live underground, in hollow hills or magical realms that could sometimes be accessed through caves, ancient mounds, or even the roots of old trees. These beings were known to be capricious, sometimes helping humans, but more often tricking or stealing from them. The green skin of the children was a classic fairy attribute in many local traditions. Green was the color of the other world, the color of magic and nature spirits. The children's emergence from a pit in the earth looked exactly like a crossing over from the fairy realm into the mortal world. Their strange, unrecognizable clothing and their otherworldly beauty also matched descriptions of the Fae. The bells they heard luring them through the cave, that too was a common motif in fairy lore. It was said that the sound of fairy music or bells was so enchanting, it could lead mortals astray, making them lose all track of time and place. The children's initial diet of beans also has echoes in folklore. In some traditions, fairy food was different from human food. It was believed that if a mortal ate food in the fairy realm, they would be trapped there forever. Perhaps, in a reverse of this belief, the children could only eat the food of their world, at least at first. Their gradual adaptation to human food, especially in Agnes's case, could be seen as her slowly losing her connection to the fairy world and becoming more mortal. Her brother's death could be interpreted as his inability to survive in the coarse, sunlit world of humans, his fairy nature being too delicate for it. The story was recorded by two educated men, William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall. While they were chroniclers of history, they lived in a world where the line between fact and folklore was blurry. Ralph even mentions that he heard the story directly from Sir Richard de Calne himself years later. For them and their readers, the possibility that the children were from a fairy world was a serious one. It was a logical explanation within their belief system. The story wasn't just a quaint village tale. It was potential evidence of the supernatural world that they believed lay just beyond the veil of everyday perception. As centuries passed, new theories emerged, reflecting the changing beliefs of the times. When the age of folklore gave way to the age of science fiction, the story of the green children was reinterpreted once again. The underground land of St. Martin's was no longer seen as a fairy mound, but as another planet, or perhaps even the inside of a hollow earth. The children were not fairies, but aliens. This paranormal interpretation takes the details of the story and fits them into a science fiction narrative, and it's surprisingly effective. It's a bit like a medieval episode of Doctor Who. Consider the evidence from this perspective. The green skin could be a biological trait adapted to a different atmosphere or the light of a different sun. The twilight world Agnes described could be a planet that is tidally locked to its star, with one side in perpetual day and the other in perpetual night, and life existing in the terminator zone between them. Or perhaps they came from a subterranean civilization on their own planet. The strange clothes of an unrecognizable material could be a spacesuit or simply alien fabric. Their unknown language would, of course, be their native alien tongue. The story of the cave and the sound of bells takes on a new meaning in this light. Could it be a garbled description of a teleportation event, a wormhole, a malfunction in their spacecraft's transport system that accidentally beamed them from their world or ship to the bottom of a pit in 12th century Suffolk? The loud sound of bells could be the sound of the transportation technology itself, interpreted through the sensory experience of a frightened child. Their emergence into the blinding sunlight and different atmosphere of Earth would have been a terrifying and disorienting shock. This theory neatly explains why the boy, perhaps being more sensitive or less biologically robust, could not adapt to Earth's environment and died. Agnes, however, managed to acclimatize, and her skin color changed as her body adjusted to our sun and atmosphere. While it sounds fantastical, the alien theory is compelling because it addresses the high strangeness of the case. It takes the most bizarre elements of the story, the green skin, the underground home, the sudden appearance, at face value. It suggests that the story is not a myth or a misidentification, but a literal, albeit misunderstood account of an extraordinary event. Today, on the 5th of September 2025, the story of the Green Children of Woolpit remains as captivating as ever. It has endured for nearly 900 years, a testament to its power as a mystery. It is a story that refuses to be neatly filed away. Each theory, whether psychological, folkloric, or paranormal, provides a compelling lens through which to view the events, but none can be definitively proven. The original sources, the Chronicles of William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall, are just distant enough in time to be unverifiable, but just detailed enough to feel tantalizingly real. They are our only windows into this medieval enigma. The lack of a final answer is precisely what makes the story so powerful. It has become a kind of historical Rorschach test, reflecting the beliefs and preoccupations of whoever is telling it. For the medieval peasant, it was a chilling tale of fairies. For the modern skeptic, it's a tragic story of displaced children and malnutrition. For the UFO enthusiast, it's a classic close encounter case. The story is flexible enough to accommodate all these interpretations, yet it belongs fully to none of them. The village of Woolpit itself has embraced its strange history. The village sign today depicts the two green children, a permanent reminder of the day mystery came to visit. The tale has left an indelible mark on our collective imagination. It reminds us that the past is a foreign country, a place where the beliefs and fears were very different from our own. It also suggests that even in a world that feels thoroughly mapped and explained, there are pockets of deep mystery that resist easy answers. The story of Agnes and her brother sits at the crossroads of history, myth, and human psychology. It is a puzzle box with no key, and we are left to wonder what really happened on that long-ago harvest day. Were they simply lost children, transformed by trauma into figures of myth? Were they visitors from a hidden fairy realm, a brief and tragic intrusion of magic into the mortal world? Or were they something else, travelers from a place so far away it defies our imagination? The truth is, we will never know. The Green Children of Woolpit remain suspended in time, forever emerging from that shadowy pit into the bright Suffolk sun, their eyes wide with fear and wonder. Their story is a whisper from the past, a riddle that continues to echo through the centuries, as mysterious and unsolved as it was on the day they first appeared.